Good morning, everyone. Today is Tuesday, July 21. I'm Dr. Allison Arwady, Commissioner at the Chicago Department of Public Health. Thanks for tuning in for The Doctor is In, Ask Dr. Arwady. As you can see, we have a special guest who I'm very excited about. This is Dr. Janice Jackson. She is the Chief Executive Officer of Chicago Public Schools.
Yeah.
So I know, even last week we were getting some schools questions, and I said, hold those till next week because we'll be talking a lot about what we're thinking about with COVID in schools. And so no better person to do this than Dr. Jackson. So let me tell you a little bit about her background so you can start putting in your questions, then we'll do the data, and then really dedicate questions to that. So we always remind everybody about social distancing, so let's check our social distancing.
Looks good.
Looks good.
Yeah.
We're more than 6 feet apart. And again, I remind you that that's what I want you doing. If everyone is keeping this amount of distance, you're keeping your kids to do that, that's one of the most important things that we can do to really work on the spread of COVID. All right, so Dr. Jackson, a little bit of background, and I'm going to read you this list because I love all of the things that you've been here. So Dr. Jackson is a former student, teacher, principal, network chief, Chief Education Officer, and now the Chief Executive Officer for Chicago Public Schools.
Yeah.
So I love that. You've been part of CPS
my entire
whole life. And you probably know, but Chicago Public Schools is the third largest school district in the country and has really been known for a lot of the recent gains. And, maybe if we have a second, you can even talk a little bit about that. But really, Chicago's known as a leader in urban education.
Absolutely.
And I've really been impressed by seeing a lot of what's coming in, even before COVID. And, so much of this is about broadly creating this clear framework for excellence at all times.
Yeah.
And as folks may have seen on Friday, Dr. Jackson, the mayor, myself, other people who have been part of the CPS decision-making process did a big press conference to really think about some of what that framework looks like. So Dr. Jackson has a master's degree in leadership and administration, a doctorate in urban school leadership from the University of Illinois at Chicago, so perfect background.
Thank you.
And you live in Chicago, husband and a couple of kids.
Yep.
All right, great. So why don't we to give folks just a little bit of framework before we get to the data, and then we'll come back. Maybe if you can just let us know a little bit about, what you were thinking about, what you really want people, parents in the community to understand about this framework and how we're thinking about COVID and CPS together.
Whew.
I know.
Well, first,
it's a
lot. No, first, thank you for giving me this opportunity to be here. I've been talking about this a lot, but it's really important to have more time. So I appreciate the fact that you're opening up this platform. And as we announced the plan last Friday, one of the things that I committed to was constant communication to make sure that people understand what we're thinking. And, you asked what I was thinking. I think the first thing that comes to mind when we talk about COVID is that everything is on the table and things are always unpredictable. And so when we created this plan, flexibility was central to making sure that this plan is as dynamic as the world around us and as we learn more about COVID. So a couple of things that I want to say. You shared my biography, which I appreciate. I think the most important role is the role of parent. I am a mom, and my kids are going to be going back to school in the fall. And if the health conditions allow for that, where schools are open, they will be in class. And I say that because I want parents to know that I am up at night. I have anxiety about this. I am just as worried and frustrated with everything that is going on as many of you are. I also know that there are things that we do know about this disease. We've learned a lot working with you and your team. And I do think that there are things that we can do to mitigate the risk and the spread of COVID while doing, as far as I'm concerned as an educator, our most important thing, which is raising our students and educating our students. And so the plan that we have in place is a hybrid model, which I'll explain a little bit about what that is. I'm sure we're going to get more questions, but essentially students are going to be divided up into pods. So if you're in a class with 30 students, 15 students will come to school in person on Monday, Tuesday. And then on Wednesday, it will be all remote. So that's the opportunity for the teacher to see all of the students, those in both pods, plus our students that will be in a full remote setting. And then the second set of 15 students will attend on Thursday, Friday. And so we surveyed our parents ahead of this, and majority of our parents said that they would send their kids back to school on the day that they completed the survey. Now we know that that changes, there are ebbs and flows with that, but about another group of parents talked about being unsure until they saw the plan from CPS. They wanted to see and be assured that we were going to have the proper mitigating strategies and practices in place to keep their kids safe. And then we have some parents who rightfully so are very concerned about their kids coming back because of pre-existing health conditions, etc. And so we want to make sure that people understand that this plan is just that, it's a plan. We work in concert with Dr. Arwady and her team, and if you say we can't go back, we don't go back. And you know, it's been a pleasure working with you over the past few months on this, because your expertise has really helped to calm me down when there were times where we didn't know what was going on, but also to help guide our decision making in the midst of this pandemic. And so the last thing I want to make sure parents are fully aware of is that we do have safety measures in place. We've purchased thousands upon thousands of dispensers of hand sanitizer that are going to be strategically displayed throughout the school. We purchased signage, which is getting delivered to the schools as we speak. So signage to remind students of, you know, what to do, proper social distancing, face mask. We want to make sure that all of our students and staff have access to those. Of course, people can wear their own, but we will be providing them so that there is no gap between, you know, I lost it or left it at home. I've worked in schools for years. I know how that goes. And just really making sure that people understand we're going to be putting in the proper strategies to keep our kids safe. And all of our decision making is guided by what the health professionals like yourself tell us. And I think that that's critically important. And I hope that parents know and understand that we're working in lockstep on this plan.
Yeah, wonderful. And that's right. I mean, this has been one of the biggest questions, I mean, from the beginning. I think back to the early days of COVID and where we were, you know, initially seeing cases and needing to make decisions about, you know, closing schools in person and then moving ahead to what does it mean to move to remote learning and thinking about feeding. You know, it's been this sort of constant progression. And folks from Chicago Department of Public Health literally have been talking to folks from Chicago Public Schools every single day as we've been really thinking and making plans together. And I do feel very good about the way that we've planned for sort of all possibilities. So if you look at this plan, and it is available online, we'll point people to the framework, and we're interested in feedback on it. You'll see that this hybrid model that really we feel like we can support with where we are right now in our outbreak, and I'll give numbers on that in a minute. But there's also some details in there about if we did need to move to a fully virtual environment, what would that look like? And in a best case scenario, maybe down the line there's a vaccine, things are really in place, what would it look like to potentially move to even a more in-person? And so I think I feel very good about it. I think it's thoughtful. It's had a lot of input already with more to come. That lets us really recognize we have to make sure, you know, kids are getting educated and some thought around that. So let's look at the data quickly, and I'll do a quick update, and then I know with that you're going to have a lot of questions. So you can put them in the box below. You can put them with the hashtag #AskDrArwady, Facebook, Twitter, etc., and we'll get to your questions. So quickly, as far as a data update, and as far as an update for other things for COVID. So as always, you can go to chai.gov/COVID-, that's COVID-DASH for dashboard, and that will get you to the latest updated data on what's happening. You can also, as always, go to chicago.gov/coronavirus, and right up at the top under latest data. So if we take a look here at the dashboard, again, this is what you can look at yourself, you'll see that we're at a total of 57,148 confirmed cases in Chicago, 2,727 deaths in Chicago. Our confirmed cases right now are at 228 cases per day. And that's relevant because early last week, we had let people know that if we got back over that 200 per day case rate, that pushed us in Chicago back into what's called a high incidence or sort of a high risk state for COVID. Now that does not mean, you know, all sirens flashing, have to move back to phase 3, can't open schools. It's none of that. But it puts us back into a space where we might think about doing some potential rollbacks, and we're sort of going to pay extra attention. And so it's in that setting of us being back over those 200 cases, and particularly, as you heard us talk about last week, we've been seeing those increases in that 18 to 29-year-old group in particular. We looked at some details, and then yesterday, as I'm sure most of you saw, we did make the decision for right now to close indoor bars in particular, and that's because generally that's one of the riskiest scenarios that we know across the whole country. Certainly more likely to attract younger people, but also it can be harder to maintain the social distance in the crowd. Sometimes, you know, where you have alcohol, people sometimes are not thinking about it as much, but also you're drinking. You can't have the mask on. They're loud environments. People are often projecting. There's more opportunity for spread, and we've seen a lot of that. So we made the decision that for right now, indoor bars only would be closed. We also put a few smaller restrictions in place. We dropped the number, if you're at a table for indoor dining or indoor bars, that went from a occupancy of 10 back down to 6. We also said that if you're going to be getting personal services, like in barbershops, etc., you have to have face coverings on. So you can't be getting a facial, you can't be getting beard trimming right now, you just have to have the face covering. And then a recommendation that residential property managers limit guest entries to 5 per unit, to think about the ways in which people are gathering. So as always, you can go to chicago.gov/coronavirus to see more about that. But I want to make the point for the discussion today is that we, the reason that we're putting that in place is because it's a very surgical way to sort of dial back a little bit in a way that we hope will let us keep our whole outbreak in good control. Our outbreak remains in good control at the moment. That is where we want to keep it. If we were to get up to a point where we were seeing 400 cases per day in Chicago, right, about twice what we have now, that would put us up in the range where we're requiring quarantine for people coming from other places. That, you know, is sort of a point where we might start thinking about, are we at a place where maybe school couldn't be open? There's no one magic number that makes it happen, but kind of in the same way the 200 makes us think about what do we need to do surgically. If we were up sort of more in that range, that's where we'd be having some more conversations and thinking about it. So I just wanted people to understand that for some context. So I encourage you to explore further if you're interested in the data, but our confirmed case rate is at 228 per day right now. Our deaths remain at an average of 4 per day here in Chicago. It's good, much lower compared to the almost 50 we had at the peak. Our positivity rate is at 4.9% using the traditional way we've been calculating it. So I think with that, we will go ahead and turn to questions, which I see already we are getting many, many questions in. So I think let's kick in right away with some questions and then see where we go from there. All right. So here's a question from Rebel in Chicago via Twitter. Dr. Jackson, how is CPS ensuring that remote or virtual learning will be equitable between class and socioeconomic communities?
First, that's a good question, and equity is at the core of all that we do, but it's also a heavy lift. We know that there are some communities that are disproportionately hit by COVID because of pre-existing conditions related to social and economic factors that aren't great, in particular for Black and Latino students. The same holds true in education. And so when we rolled out our remote learning program, which I'm proud of, we did it in an emergency setting. And our teachers, our principals, our content teams in central office worked extremely hard to put that together. But I don't think there's a single person in this city or across this country that will say remote learning works as well as having an in-person experience with a teacher. What we also saw in that is that just like in class instruction, we saw gaps, whether that was access to technology, which took us a couple of weeks to get out, internet accessibility, which we've worked through, and we're proud to announce the Chicago Connected program, which is allowing for internet access for 100,000 of our families who can't afford it. But also gaps in expectations. And so one of the things that we're going to be sharing next week is our results from an analysis of the remote learning program, surveys from our parents, and surveys from our administrators who had to manage the program. And we're going to be talking about ways in which we improve it. One thing I know for sure is we're going to really ramp up social and emotional learning support. making sure that people know how to reach out and contact students, whether that is in person or using telehealth and those type of procedures and platforms to work with our students. We also are only going to use one platform. It's going to be our Google platform, and that will allow the district to have visibility so we can see who's assigning work, who is doing work, and are students receiving support or the resources that they need if they're not completing the work for some reason. And so I think that we are working to improve remote learning, but we are also keenly focused on getting our kids back in front of teachers, because that's where the magic happens, and we know that our teachers are going to be able to help take them to the next level and prepare them.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. Yeah. And I think I talked a little bit about this on Friday. You know, I'm licensed both as a pediatrician and as a general adult doctor, and particularly from the pediatric standpoint, you know, we know that children, especially young children, just don't learn as well from screens.
No,
we
don't.
Try, you know, and I really commend you for the work in terms of trying to set that up as much as we can. But we know that it's just not as effective. And that's the academic piece, the social emotional learning, all of the things that children get from having more caring adults in their life.
Absolutely.
And frankly, you know, we also know that depending on socioeconomic status, there are kids who may have more opportunities for learning in settings where, you know, and you know, how do we keep that up is about making sure
and what I would add to that, and what I worry about, because I've seen this even with my own children and people, you know, in my social circle, people are getting tutors, they're bringing in all these resources. So when we start talking about that gap in learning, those disparities are going to be even more great the longer we keep kids out of school. And one fact that I like to remind people is that majority of our students come from low income backgrounds. They are working class, working poor. So their parents are essential workers. So they're already back to work. And they are working. They worked through the pandemic during our darkest times, and you know, didn't always have a plan for their students. And we saw that play out during our full remote setting. And so I think that providing families with options while doing it safely is something that it's really our responsibility to do. You know, I would hope that we don't have to use a plan like this, that, you know, there's a vaccine and we're in a different place in the near future. But if we're really being serious about what that looks like over time, we're talking about a considerable amount of time. And so the question that I wrestle with every day is, how do we keep people safe, but how do we also ensure that our students are learning? This is not about having a babysitter or somewhere for kids to go. Kids have to learn. I'm worried about this generation, and if we don't figure out how to learn in the COVID environment, we've learned how to work, how to shop, you know, how to do recreational things safely. We have to learn how to do school in this environment.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. All right, so we've got a few questions here, including from some parents wondering about students in grades 11 and 12.
Oh, so, that's the hot topic.
Yeah, why are students from grades 11 and 12 not being considered for the hybrid option? So maybe give a little bit of background on that, and then talk about some of the thinking around that.
So when we originally put this plan together, and it is a plan and a framework, and we're asking for feedback, when we put it together, we knew that the high schools, that there would be difficulty in keeping them in these pods, because at the 9th and 10th grade level, student schedules are pretty much the same. And so there isn't a lot of movement. We can kind of group them. It's very predictable. But at the 11th and 12th grade level, that's when we start to see a lot of the complexity. If students are taking advanced music, advanced language, you know, a career and technical ed program. And so our thinking was to prioritize the 9th and 10th graders. However, we are open for feedback. We are encouraging parents to go onto the survey. Some parents have done that, many have, thousands, and you know, hundreds have started to email me as well. And so I've gotten
and me actually too.
And I've gotten that question a lot. And so I really want to share this with people so that they understand that it is an iterative plan, and we are taking your feedback. That is something that we're looking into. We thought that was the best approach. It was our best thinking on that day. But given the overwhelming response that I've been hearing from parents of 11th and 12th graders, that is something that we're going to go back and look at and see for high schools that can do it, whether that is they have the capacity to bring people back and do it. We have some schools that are severely under-enrolled and the buildings were made for two or 3,000 students. They may be able to pull it off. And then there are some schools that are getting really creative with scheduling and saying, hey, we can do 2 or 3 classes the first semester, do the other classes the second semester. That will allow us more stability in the pod. So I want people to stay tuned on that. Still complete the survey, still attend those town halls, but I would say the biggest piece of feedback that I've received on the plan has been around the 11th and 12th graders being able to come to school.
Yeah, absolutely. So where should folks go to fill out the survey or to find out more information?
Yeah. Well, we're promoting it on all of our social media channels, so you can find it there. But as always, we have a website dedicated, cps.edu/coronavirus, and you can find the survey as well as our plan and information about the town halls on that webpage.
Yeah, and it's good. There's a lot of detail on there.
Yeah.
If you've got questions about, what is my student's day going to look like?
Exactly.
How are,
Yeah.
what are the things in place to try to protect it as much as we can? I'm seeing a lot of questions coming in, and that's a great place to go because
Yes.
we've tried to, we'll get through what we can, but it's a good place to go for
Yeah.
additional questions.
Yeah.
Okay. Here is a Twitter question, Dr. Jackson. If a parent chooses the entirely online option, who will be facilitating that learning? Is it a teacher from the central office or a teacher from their current school?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And one of the reasons why this is a framework and not a complete plan, because we can't do this level of complexity and planning complexity without working at the local school level. So in the best case scenario, the person that will be facilitating instruction will be a teacher from the school where your child attends. There will be teachers who cannot work in a school building because of pre-existing conditions and others who may require accommodations because of their health condition. We will honor that. We are working through that right now as we speak. And so those teachers who can work but must work from home will be assigned to teaching these virtual academies. There may be a few schools where maybe they have more teachers who can't work from home as a result of their health conditions, and so we will be utilizing other available staff, but that will be a very rare occurrence and in a few small situations. In almost every case, the teacher will be a teacher who works at the school where your child attends.
Okay, great. At Illinois Raise Your Hand from Twitter is wondering, is there an attendance policy? Will there be PE? How are you thinking about tracking attendance?
A lot of questions in there. We're waiting for official guidance from ISB, the Illinois State Board of Education. For those of you unfamiliar with that acronym, they govern how our schools operate. Of course, we have heard from them that there will be updated guidance around attendance, what counts as a school day, grading, etc. What I'm hearing is that it's going to look more like what we are accustomed to. Of course, ISB did the right thing when we were first responding to the pandemic. It was an emergency situation. The requirements around attendance were a little loose, but what we've learned from that is that if we don't have tighter requirements, the students who we're most concerned about, our most vulnerable youth, are not getting the same level of access. And so I do expect that we're going to have more strict enforcement around attendance and accounting for that, but we have to wait for ISB to give us the final guidance on that. As far as PE and some of these other requirements, this is a place where we're still working with our partners at CTU. There are some teachers, like PE teachers, art teachers, who teach everybody or half the school in some cases in some of our elementary schools. And so we have to figure out how to offer that in a safe environment while mitigating the risk. So of course we can't have one teacher interacting with hundreds of students, because if that person gets sick, the whole school is going to shut down. But we have to continue to work with CTU and get agreement and alignment on what it looks like for our specials teachers, as we call them.
Okay, great. And some more questions here. Here's one from CRITSEM from Twitter. Under the reopening framework, if a teacher tests positive for COVID-19, do all of the students in the class need to then stay home and quarantine for 14 days? So maybe you can start and I'll chime in also.
Yeah, because and that's what I've been telling a lot of people. We work hand in hand with your department. Even during the initial phase where we had a skeleton crew, we had COVID cases. And, we know that the schools will probably find out sooner because of those social networks. People find out, they're going to tell the principal, tell a staff member. we notify CDPH immediately, and they have a process that Dr. Arwady will walk us through. If the reason we're doing the pods is for safety. If a teacher is teaching in a pod with those 15 students on any given day, those students would be asked to quarantine along with the teacher because they have been in close contact, although they're wearing masks and other proper social distancing mechanisms are in place. Those people would be asked to quarantine. And if everyone is healthy and we're just monitoring symptoms, they'll be able to do that remotely. This plan goes back and forth in that way. If they become ill, we obviously have to come up with another plan, and that requires us to use substitute teachers, which we are aggressively recruiting for substitute teachers. So if you know anyone who has a degree and is looking for employment and would like to sub during this time, please visit our HR website for more information about that. And we will be sharing more information about upcoming job fairs for both substitute teachers and custodian workers.
I was a substitute teacher for a little while, right after I was out of college. So it's a hard job, but it's a good job. So
I subbed for 2 weeks, and thank God I got a job. That's all
right.
I'll say.
All right. Yeah, I'll just add to that exactly this idea of pods is really about limiting risk. We are going to have COVID as part of our future for many months to come. No matter what happens with the outbreak here, the hope is that we'll be able to keep things at this really reasonably controlled or even better level. But even once a vaccine is available, it's not like the instant a vaccine is available, it comes into everybody. There will be a period of, likely many months where we'll be rolling this out and thinking about it. And so part of the reason it was so important to sort of have this thoughtful framework that lets us be flexible is that we're going to be living with this, not just related to schools, but really to all facets for a long, long time. And so we need to be coming in, this new normal. What does it look like? And so the idea of the pod is really fairly similar to what we've done in other settings. It's what we've done with the Parks District and the camps this summer, which has worked very well, where you really have a limited number of people who there's the potential for close contact. We know, particularly younger children, we're going to try social distancing, masks, and we model that well. I actually think kids will do well with it. But just recognizing that it's hard to entirely limit that close contact. If there were a case, then that pod would be quarantined for the 14 days. And that's regardless of sort of testing or whatnot, because again, remember, even if I were to test somebody right at that moment, your test can come positive for days moving on. So we would have this 14-day requirement, and the Chicago Department of Public Health would be doing the monitoring just like we do for cases in any setting. So we'd do this case investigation, whoever were the close contacts, we'd be doing the follow-up, and then if there were additional cases, we'd be working with that. And we have a lot of detail available. There's more out there, and if people have questions, but we've thought about, one case in a school would not close the school in that context. Right? It allows us to really be careful and thoughtful about where the risks are. And even 2 cases, if it were 2 in a single pod, that's not necessarily unexpected. If we started seeing multiple cases across different pods or there were different things in place, we would make some of those decisions. But broadly, I think the plan is good because it's thought a lot about how do we live with the reality that there will still be COVID for months to come. But everything that we can do to limit that risk, limit that spread, and whether and it's the same if a child, for example, not infected in the school environment, but was at home, we do that same investigation around when was it, were there exposures, and they'd be part of our regular tracing. Okay, so Sonia Crystal Jackson on Facebook. What is this health check from home prior to the start of the school day?
Yeah, that's a great question because I didn't talk a lot about a day in the life. So basically what we're going to expect is that students will check in remotely. They'll be able to use an app that schools will have access to. And we've seen this work in a lot of places. A lot of businesses are using this. And essentially you can use it from your phone. You would go in and answer 4 simple questions about your health. And a lot of the research, and Dr. Arwady can back me up on this, shows that when people have to be reflective like that, it's actually a good reminder of our own individual social responsibility. But they're going to ask questions about whether they have COVID or a fever or if they've been exposed to anybody. And it really is a way to push for people to be reflective prior to them walking out of their home, getting on the bus, the CTA, or walking to school and entering the building. once a student gets to the school, we're going to have staggered start times, certain doors, maybe these students in this particular grade use this door, etc. And then they're going to be checked for their temperature when they enter the school. If students are well, they go to class, they stay in their pods, they remain in that assigned classroom for majority of the day, with the exception of the breaks to go to the restroom, to wash their hands, and make sure that we're practicing the right hygiene practices. And we will be promoting that throughout the day. Again, once they leave at the end of the day, they're going to leave through those designated doors. And so it's going to be a really tight process. It is kind of daunting when you listen to all of this, but what I can tell you from working in schools for 15 years is that students are more adaptable than we think. They actually start to follow these rules faster than adults. And so while this plan is complex and it can be mind-blowing at times, what I know about students and how well they adapt is that they usually pick up on these things a lot sooner than the adults. And so that's what we're going to be working through. And when school starts, like that first week, this is all we're going to be talking about. We're training staff ahead of the school year, but we're going to be training students that first weeks on how to do that. So more to come, parents. You'll be hearing more about that.
Yeah, I think the routine thing, you know, kids love routines,
Yeah, they do.
and sort of, you know, get folks into here's the regular things that we're doing, and it's just becomes again part of that new normal.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
All right, we've got a question from BBB Fritz on Twitter. Would you recommend that teachers wear face shields in addition to masks? And is saying 9th and 10th grade teachers will be interacting with 150 students per week. So maybe I'll take the first part of that. This question of do teachers need to wear face shields? So we don't have a recommendation that teachers wear face shields in addition to masks, just as we don't have a recommendation that the general public be wearing face shields in addition to masks. Masks are more important than face shields in terms of really having covered both the mouth and the nose. It's most important for source control. So when you have the nose and the mouth covered, that keeps the great majority of the droplets from ever even leaving, you know, leaving the person's mouth. The face shields don't do that same thing in terms of there's more possibility for, and we know this from looking at lab research, epidemiologic research, there's more possibility for those droplets to sort of get out in that respect. Face shields are primarily important in healthcare settings or other settings where people are doing procedures or things that make the possibility of aerosolized COVID more of a possibility. So, you know, say I am testing someone for COVID and I am, you know, sticking swabs into the nose to make somebody cough. That is sort of more potential for aerosolization. I should have a face shield on in that setting. But for teachers, for the general public, we do not have a recommendation for face shields in addition to masks. We continue, obviously, to follow the science. If we were to learn anything new, that could shift. But based on everything that we've seen around the world, based on what we know about this virus, the mask is really the crucial part of this. And the most important thing, frankly, is that people wear them. And so I get a lot of questions about what's the best mask, what's the best kind of mask, and except for saying don't wear one that has a valve, because the valve does not stop your germs from coming out. You don't want to wear one with a valve. So besides not wearing a valve, the most important thing is just it's covering your nose and your mouth, and that it is in that way you're protecting others, they're protecting you. You get some degree of protection, probably yourself, but most of it is about the source control. And if it's comfortable and you'll actually wear it, that's the best mask for you. 2 layers of fabric, which is what really all the typical masks have, is very good and has been shown to be effective.
Good, I learned something.
Yeah, there you go. Did you want to add to this comment about 9th and 10th graders interacting?
I think that is one of the things that we're looking at the high school level. I talked about that complexity earlier in this solution where instead of teaching all 6 or 7 classes per semester, thinking about breaking that up, that's something that a lot of our high schools are now exploring, and that's going to break down the size of that cohort and the amount of kids that they interact with. But I think that your point is well taken around wearing the mask. Of course, the hygiene that I talked about, those things are going to be critically important. And what I also want people to know is that we are studying this. There are other countries that have started school. There are lessons learned from that. And what we've heard from them time and time again is that the social responsibility piece is critical. That if you do the social mitigation, if you wear a mask, if people practice good hygiene, that this is less of an issue. And so it's going to be really important that we start to socialize this with our children now, if families aren't already doing that, but we are going to be prioritizing at that first week when they come back to school.
All right, perfect. We're getting a lot of interesting questions here. I'm not sure we'll have answers to all of them, but
you can send them to help with our planning.
Yeah. We'll take one here. I think there's a lot of details we're still thinking out here. But Melanie Meyer on Facebook, just to give a sense of that, is wondering about fire drills. What do they look like? Have we thought about that? I'll say, from the health department standpoint, this falls in the long list of things that we are working around the details of what does that look like. I would imagine, in a fire drill situation, you're going to be doing all the same things with the social distancing, keeping the mask, thinking about trying to, have children not be in close contact. Obviously, fire drills are important. I know you're thinking a lot about entrances and exits, so I don't know if that's
actually a really good question. We are required by law to do that, and I don't think that's going to be lifted because of COVID. Again, this is a place where we still have some planning and work to do. So, Melody, that's a really good question. I don't have a great answer today, except to say we will still be required to do them, and we will be putting in plans so that we can do it with the proper social distancing. People may be a little less surprised than they typically are with the fire drill, just so that we can practice. But one place where we have spent a lot of time that's related to this is through our transportation services on the school buses. A lot has been shared about that across the country, because Chicago doesn't rely on school buses as much as we do, as much as other districts do. But we are working to make sure that there's proper social distancing on those buses, that those pods and students who are on the same bus, that's tight, that we're not switching up and switching out buses. And we have started talking about, bus evacuation in normal circumstances, so people aren't passing along germs and stuff like that. So definitely a good question that I'll take back to the team, and we'll share more about that probably closer to when school starts back.
And these are the sorts of questions and thoughts that we love to get questions and feedback on. It lets us really make sure we're thinking about everything. There's all of these modules that we've been doing a lot of thinking about, and it's sort of just piecing those together. The same general principles are in place, but it's about how do we kind of plan ahead for that. So and there's all kinds of work happening related to that. So really a nice question. Ja Jonesy on Twitter is wondering about what options will CPS be offering for teachers with underlying health conditions, or maybe I would even expand that to thinking about students with underlying health conditions. What are we doing for that?
So I'll start with teachers and then go to students. For teachers, we will be utilizing federal requirements that are already in place. So FMLA, we're not going to have principals going and asking teachers, do you have health conditions? That's not the proper protocol. We're going to be respecting HIPAA and all of those other laws that govern us. So they will go through an FMLA process, or they will use the ADA accommodations process. So one of those two ways. We're still working through all of our details on that. This is another place where we want to make sure that CTU fully understands this process, but that's our thinking as of today. And so we need to know sooner rather than later what teachers can't work in a in-person environment given this situation, so that we can start planning, and so that principals can start planning who's teaching virtually, who's going to be able to be accessible to students in person, etc. As far as students are concerned, and this is very important for parents, I've been meeting with our principals in smaller groups to reinforce this. The only survey that I'm asking people to fill out is the survey that the district has sent out. I know some schools kind of sent things out ahead of time, and I've asked them to not do that because we don't want to confuse parents and we don't want to overwhelm you. The CPS survey is going to be your best place to share detailed responses to this plan. We are also going to have a separate registration process for any family who wants the fully remote plan. So it won't be loosey-goosey, official term there. You will register through a process that you will be hearing more about soon, and this will allow us to program your students appropriately. We will be requiring individuals to stay in that model for a period of time because we don't want people coming in and out of the pods. The pods have to be protected and safe. But if people elect to have a fully remote option, which we of course support because of a student's underlying health condition, or even if parents just aren't comfortable, we will be asking parents to make that determination and asking them to commit to that so that we can protect the pod. So parents, you will be hearing more information about that as well in the coming weeks.
All right, great.
Yeah.
So we're about out of time. I know,
Yeah. Wow.
not surprisingly, we get a lot of questions
Yeah.
in, and I really encourage people who have additional questions or feedback to
send them.
to send them and
Yeah.
be part of this process.
And I'll commit to trying to answer them on Twitter, and obviously updating all of our communication that comes out from the district accordingly.
All right, wonderful. I think just to sum up a little bit on my standpoint, I just want to say, I know people are going to continue to have questions. I know that this is a point of anxiety where we're thinking about, how do I make the right decision? What does this look like? I want you to know that at the health department, myself, my whole team, we are absolutely, putting the health and safety of the whole school community first. And that's the same, at CPS. We're really balancing here a number of different pieces. We feel really strongly that as long as our local outbreak can allow it, for all the reasons we talked about, having a hybrid model, having a model that lets us have these best practices, but also make sure that we can give kids the education opportunities, including the in-person where that's possible. But we'll be making decisions together, looking ahead.
Yeah.
Next month, we'll see where we are. In 2 months, we'll see where we are. In 6 months, we'll see where we are. And I want you to know that flexibility and that decision has been part of this all along. CPS was part of our pre-pandemic planning even like a year ago. If you remember last summer, we did a whole series of exercises around what if we had a pandemic here in Chicago, and we talked about feeding kids, and we talked about what remote education would look like. And so we had a little bit of a jump start that we had thought a little bit about this, and then I think as this has been happening, I really appreciate the flexibility and all the thought that your team has been putting into making the best decisions possible. So we're going to keep really working together on this. But any sort of final comments you want to say? We usually end with some sort of things to do also for everybody.
Good. I definitely have a couple of next steps, but want to just share, just piggybacking off of your final comments, that this plan is put together with care and compassion. And I know sometimes, when people hear us say that, it falls on deaf ears. People think it's trite or overused, but people who know me know where I'm coming from. I'm a parent first. I'm an educator at heart. And we're trying to balance a lot of things. I hear people talk about all the pandemics, or in particular in the Black community, the health pandemic that we're dealing with violence, educating our students. Now COVID, there's a lot there. If there was an easy answer or a magic button, nobody would beat me to it. We would be there. But this is complex. And for me, my why in doing this has always been about providing kids with educational opportunities so that they can be their best, they can be themselves and they can reach their full potential, I should say. And so in my mind, as I think about how we address this, COVID is going to be with us. And we have to ask ourselves, what obligation, what responsibility do we have to educate students, especially our most vulnerable students, given this environment? And I'm going to try. That's what this plan is about. We're going to try. We're going to be smart. We're going to be compassionate. We're going to put health first. We're going to work with professionals like Dr. Already and her team, and Dr. Fox, who leads our team, to make good decisions. But we're going to try to address these issues because that's what I signed up to do. And I know that that's what teachers and educators and principals across this district signed up to do. Parents, we need your continued support. Thousands of you completed our initial survey. Thank you for that. I think that was the biggest response we've had for any survey that we have administered, at least during my time in central office. As a next step, I would encourage people to complete the survey, which again can be found on our website, cps.edu/coronavirus. I would encourage you to attend one of the 5 town halls. The information and registration around that can also be found on our website. The next 2 things are critically important. We really need you to update your contact information. There was a question earlier about the app that we're going to be using. If you're not getting the regular emails from me, that means we don't have the proper email address for you. Shoot your principal an email. Make sure the teacher or counselor that you keep in contact with has the most up-to-date information for you and your family so we can update it in our student information system. I would ask teachers and employees to do the exact same thing, because when we start to do contact tracing and things like that, if we don't have the right phone numbers, it just delays the process and it creates more panic and fear than is necessary. And I say the last thing that I would say is to practice these strategies at home. I've been talking to my kids about them. They actually hold me accountable because, again, adults, we're kind of the worst ones. So, you know, if I'm popping on my mask right before I go into Mariano's, my daughter is pointing out that, Mommy, you should have had that on as soon as we walked out the door, not taking it off to talk on the phone and all of that. And so I say all that to say, you are our partners in this. Start to socialize these practices at home. This will make it easier when students return in the fall, and more importantly, it will make it safer for your children when they return to school in the fall. I want to thank you guys for listening, and more to come, because there's still definitely a lot of unanswered questions that we're getting to.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is Dr. Janice Jackson. She's the CEO of Chicago Public Schools, and I've loved having you on, and we'll have, you know, more opportunities to keep answering questions and really partner. And this, you know, we're one Chicago, and it's about how can we do what's best for our kids.
Absolutely.
In terms of a couple of follow-ups for me on things to do, the Business Affairs and Consumer Protection Department is hosting a series of webinars this week, particularly around some of the changes in the restrictions. So today at 2 p.m. is an overview for all business types. Where are we on COVID in Chicago? What do you need to be doing? 4 p.m. there's a session specifically for restaurants and bars. Later in the week, we'll be having sessions for health and fitness centers and personal services. So as always, chicago.gov/coronavirus. These will be recorded. You can look at them later, but those are kicking off today, and that's important. And then secondly, I just wanted to highlight that we've been getting a number of questions around if I can't pay rent or I'm worried about eviction. And I wanted you to know that you can go to chicago.gov/eviction, and there is details on there about how you can be protected at this time. And so if you're having trouble paying rent due to the pandemic here in Chicago, you can get additional protection from eviction just by sending a simple text or a simple email to your landlord that just says, I have been unable to pay rent because I have been financially affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. So if you yourself or you know of someone who's having that trouble, please make sure you're texting that, you're emailing that, you're writing a letter, you're getting that in writing, because that helps protect you against that. So go please to that website if you're having questions there. So those are my updates. Today at 1 o'clock, we're doing with the mayor a press conference that's a little bit more about masks and some steps there. So I encourage you to tune in if you're interested for that. And I think anything else?
Nope, I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for being on. We'll be back later in the week with another longer in-person, and we continue to update every single day and take your questions. So put them in, we see them, we respond to them. Really appreciate hearing directly from folks. And next time around, I'll get back to some of your more science-based questions, but happy to have the chance on education today. So thanks very much. Keep doing the things that you know work, and be safe, Chicago.